The First World War was a storm that engulfed Europe and spilled across oceans, dragging millions into the mud of trenches and the flames of artillery. And yet the entry of the United States turned what seemed like a deadlock into a conclusion. But let us take a step back and imagine a different path. A path where America never crossed the ocean, where the stars and stripes never joined the banners of France and Britain, where the weight of American industry and manpower never pressed upon the Central Powers. In this version of history, Europe bleeds without relief. The Central Powers, already staggering from hunger and blockade, continue to hold lines against exhausted enemies. Germany, strained under shortages, but still formidable, Austria-Hungary, fragile yet clinging together, and the Ottoman Empire, fighting desperately in its last breaths, stand against an Entente that itself is cracking. France weary, Britain indebted, Russia collapsing into revolution, both sides crippled by years of slaughter, with no decisive force to end the nightmare. When America did join in our timeline, it was not just soldiers arriving, it was a wave of confidence, a signal that the war would not drag on forever. Without them, the Entente morale wanes, the soldiers in the trenches counting the years and wondering if salvation will ever arrive. The Germans gamble again with offensives in the West, each attack carrying the hope of breaking through before they collapse entirely. And while history tells us these gambles failed, the absence of American troops changes everything. Each breakthrough has a little more chance, each French mutiny a little more dangerous. Consider the spring of 1917. In our world, the United States declared war after submarine attacks and the infamous telegram. In this alternate world, Germany holds its nerve. It avoids the reckless provocations. It does not tempt fate by urging Mexico into a hopeless fight. It continues the blockade, but carefully, ensuring not to draw America in. Wilson still speaks of mediation, of peace without victory. The American public still uninterested in sending sons to die for foreign monarchs, and so the war becomes entirely European. The Entente look aced, only to find chaos. Russia tearing itself apart. The revolution sweeping away tsars and generals. The German high command releasing divisions from the Eastern Front and redeploying them westward without fear of American reinforcements. And each train that carries German veterans back to France tips the balance further. Meanwhile, propaganda in Paris and London grows thin. The promises of final offensives ring hollow. Men desert or mutiny, whispering that they are being fed into the furnace with no hope of victory. Britain imports food under constant submarine threat, its treasury drained. France clings to borrowed money and broken promises. The absence of American loans and supplies cuts deeper than any artillery shell. By late 1917, the Entente finds itself cornered. Each ally that once seemed dependable now falters. Italy crumbles at Caporetto, Romania beaten, Greece uncertain, the Balkans aflame. The world that once appeared aligned against the Kaiser now looks less certain, and German soldiers, though hungry and tired, begin to see glimpses of triumph. But victory in this world is not glorious. It is not the triumphal march of clean uniforms and brass bands. It is a slow, grinding suffocation of one alliance and the stubborn endurance of the other. It is misery stretched out longer than in our history, because without America, the war does not end swiftly. The peace does not come mercifully. Instead, every front festers, every capital grows more restless, and each government fears collapse as much as defeat. So imagine a Europe where by 1918 there is no 11th hour, no armistice day to remember. Instead, the war claws into another year and another, with soldiers counting winters instead of months. The Central Powers still alive, the Entente still desperate, and the United States still across the ocean, watching, waiting, profiting quietly from trade, but refusing to bleed on foreign soil. This is the beginning of our story. A world where the decision of one nation alters the fate of continents, where millions who hoped for salvation see only more trenches and more graves, where America never joins the war and Europe is left to devour itself. As the war drags on without the American presence, the Central Powers seize opportunities that once slipped from their grasp. The German High Command, emboldened by divisions freed from the Eastern Front, launches new offensives with desperate energy. These are not half measures, but full attempts to shatter the Western lines before their own hunger shatters them. Soldiers hardened in the East, veterans of brutal campaigns against Russia, are now thrown against French and British trenches, and for the first time in years the lines begin to bend. The French army, already shaken by mutinies in 1917, faces a crisis. Soldiers refuse to charge again into hopeless barrages. Generals struggle to maintain discipline, and Paris trembles under the threat of internal collapse. Britain, stretched to its limits, must carry more of the burden, yet without the promise of American reinforcements, the British Expeditionary Force cannot guarantee a decisive push. Morale sinks lower than the trenches themselves. In Italy, the disaster of Caporetto worsens. Without outside aid, the Italians fall back again and again, their mountains filled with defeat and frostbite. Austria-Hungary, though fragile, finds new strength as German divisions assist their front. Together they turn the tide and drive the Italians deeper south. Rome whispers of surrender, even as its leaders cling stubbornly to honor. The Balkans, too, erupt in fire. Bulgaria, with German support, presses against Greece and Serbia. The small kingdoms already bled white find no hope of rescue. The Entente promises help, but can only send token forces, thinly spread across too many fronts. The dream of Balkan resistance dissolves under the weight of German artillery and Bulgarian determination. In the Ottoman Empire, the story shifts as well. In our world, the empire was collapsing under pressure from both the British and internal dissent. But without the full force of American-backed Entente support, the British advance is slow. The campaign in the Middle East drags. Ottoman garrisons, though weary, cling to territory longer than expected, with German material and officers stiffening their resolve. Meanwhile, on the seas, the unrestricted submarine campaign, while carefully managed, still exacts a toll. Convoys suffer losses, supplies run short. Britain, more vulnerable than ever, fears starvation. Food lines grow longer every week. The empire, still vast, now depends on fragile lifelines that may be cut at any moment. And without American convoys and destroyers, the Atlantic becomes a hunting ground. Back home in Germany, the people starve but endure. They see victories abroad and believe that suffering may yet yield triumph. Bread is scarce, coal is rationed, but the Kaiser still promises glory and restoration of order. For Austria-Hungary, each victory bought with German aid delays the inevitable breakup, but only just. Beneath the victories lies unrest among Czechs, Poles, and South Slavs, who chafe at imperial chains. Yet for now, the war keeps them subdued. Russia, once the giant of the East, now lies broken. Civil war spreads across the vast land. The Bolsheviks rise, but their control is shaky. The Germans exploit this chaos. They extract vast concessions at Brest-Litovsk, and now with more land and resources, they funnel whatever they can westward to sustain their struggle. Though imperfect, this supply breathes life into a Central Power coalition that otherwise might have collapsed entirely. Across Europe, people ask the same question: how much longer can this go on? Every casualty list, every funeral procession deepens the despair. Yet governments still cling to victory as the only justification for sacrifice. And so the war becomes endless, like a sickness that refuses to heal. Paris, London, Vienna, Berlin, Constantinople, all chained to a conflict they cannot escape. The absence of America is not just the absence of soldiers, it is the absence of financial lifelines. Without loans from across the Atlantic, Britain and France scrape the bottom of their treasuries, printing paper that buys less each month. Inflation spreads, wages stagnate, and strikes multiply. The very foundations of these societies shake.
The war that was meant to unify nations now tears them apart from within. By the start of 1918, the Entente faces a crisis of faith. France barely holding, Britain exhausted, Italy shattered, Greece and Serbia overwhelmed, Russia gone, America absent. The propaganda that once painted inevitable victory now rings hollow. The people begin to wonder whether the price has been too high, whether peace, even on harsh terms, would be better than endless blood and famine. The Central Powers, though battered, appear to be winning, not through overwhelming strength, but through stubborn survival. Every failed offensive from the Entente, every new territory seized by German or Bulgarian troops, convinces more soldiers that they are on the losing side. Whispers of surrender echo through French trenches, and even in London some politicians whisper of negotiations, though the pride of empire forbids open talk of defeat. Thus, by mid-1918, the war stands on a knife's edge. Both alliances exhausted, both peoples desperate, yet the scales tilt slightly toward Berlin and Vienna. Without America, there is no savior for the Entente, only more pain and more uncertainty.
The year turns, and with it the sense of inevitability shifts. The Entente, once certain that time was on their side, now realize time itself has betrayed them. Each month without America weakens them, while each month with Germany still standing emboldens the Central Powers. The idea that sheer attrition will break the Kaiser collapses under the weight of reality. Germany presses forward with its spring offensive. Divisions drawn from the east storm into France, their commanders determined to force a conclusion before their own hunger consumes them. Artillery rolls across no man's land. The ground shakes under the heaviest bombardments yet seen. Waves of stormtroopers exploit gaps, small at first but widening. Entire sectors collapse under the strain. British lines reel. French units surrender by the thousands. Paris shudders as the front creeps ever closer. In our history, that offensive was blunted by the arrival of fresh Americans. Here, there are no fresh Americans, only exhausted Frenchmen and weary Britons clinging desperately to crumbling trenches. The advance slows, but does not stop. Towns fall, railways captured. The dream of a breakthrough seems closer than ever. Morale among the Entente sinks lower with each mile lost. Germany, meanwhile, plunges into despair. After repeated defeats, their armies barely able to hold the line. Rome is shaken by riots. Workers demand peace. Soldiers refuse to march. The government totters on the brink. Austria-Hungary, once believed doomed, now finds itself dictating terms to a battered foe. The empire, still fragile, still haunted by ethnic divisions, yet temporarily revitalized by victory. In the Balkans, the story grows darker. Bulgaria, fighting with ferocity, secures key strongholds. Serbia, already broken, is erased from the map. Greece, forced into submission, can no longer act as a southern anchor. The Entente presence in Salonika, once a beacon of resistance, is swept aside. Central Powers soldiers march through streets once filled with French and British banners, now replaced with the flags of Sofia and Berlin. The Ottomans, too, find themselves with a temporary reprieve. Though their empire remains riddled with rebellion and corruption, they hold on longer than in our history. British forces, stretched thin, cannot advance with the same vigor. Jerusalem and Damascus remain contested, the dream of dismantling the Ottoman state delayed by the absence of American supply and coordination. At sea, the convoy war grinds on. British shipping remains under constant threat. Every vessel sunk deepens the shortages. Every sailor lost is another reminder that the Atlantic is no longer secure. Food riots begin to break out in British cities. Whispers of peace grow louder. though the government suppresses them for fear of appearing weak. Back in Berlin, the Kaiser proclaims victory near at hand. The people, though starving, cling to hope. The war effort, painted as a righteous struggle for survival, gains renewed energy with each battlefield success. The promise of peace with honor sustains them, though underneath the surface, unrest simmers. Workers strike, soldiers grumble, yet so long as victories continue, the state holds. France faces the gravest danger of all. Its army battered, its morale shattered, its government under siege from within. Mutiny spread faster than censors can hide them. Whole units refuse to go over the top again. Politicians argue endlessly, some insisting on fighting to the bitter end, others urging negotiations with Germany before Paris itself is threatened. The Republic shakes on its foundations. Revolution lurks in the shadows. Across the Atlantic, America watches with unease, yet still refuses to intervene. Isolationist voices dominate. Wilson continues to preach mediation, but without leverage, his words fall flat. The United States benefits from trade, but distances itself from the agony of Europe. Safe in its hemisphere, it becomes a spectator rather than a participant in history. The consequences of this absence are enormous, for by the summer of 1918, the Entente is unraveling. Victory no longer seems possible. Their allies vanish, their soldiers desert, their people riot. Germany and its partners, battered and starving, yet advancing, now dictate the rhythm of war. Each step closer to Paris, each surrender in Italy, each collapse in Greece adds weight to the Central Powers' bargaining position. Peace seems inevitable, yet not the peace imagined in our timeline. Instead of Germany kneeling, it is France and Britain who face the prospect of humiliation. Instead of Versailles, it may be Berlin that dictates the terms. And Europe itself braces for a settlement forged not by compromise, but by exhaustion and defeat. This is the turning point of our alternate history, the moment when the absence of America no longer merely prolongs the war, but reshapes its outcome, where the balance tips decisively toward those who in our world fell into ruin, where the dreams of Entente leaders crumbled under the weight of hunger, mutiny, and despair. As the summer of 1918 gives way to autumn, the Entente finds itself staggering toward collapse. Britain and France still cling to the hope of survival, yet every calculation shows the same outcome: their manpower dwindling, their economies broken, their allies defeated, while the Central Powers, though battered, seem poised to dictate the future. The German spring offensive does not deliver a decisive knockout blow, but it delivers enough success to erode what remains of Entente morale. French villages lie in ruins, British units pulled back again and again, strain to hold a line that recedes each week. Paris, though still standing, grows restless. Its citizens endure shortages and bombardments, but what they cannot endure is the thought that their sacrifice has been for nothing. Mutiny whispers now echo not only in trenches, but in city streets. In London, debates rage within the government. Some insist that Britain must fight to the very end. Others argue that the empire itself cannot withstand more losses. Colonies question why they bleed for a war that seems unwinnable. Canada, Australia, India, South Africa all hear voices demanding withdrawal. Trade falters, hunger spreads, and the proud empire faces a crisis of unity without precedent. Italy, broken by repeated defeats, finally buckles under the weight of despair. Its government sues for peace. Vienna celebrates, Berlin celebrates. The Central Powers now secure their southern flank and redistribute troops from Italy to France. Each victory feeds the narrative that time itself favors the Kaiser.
Each surrender convinces wavering soldiers in the West that perhaps their cause is lost. In Greece, the situation is no different. The Entente presence erased, the monarchy restored under German influence, the country submits to humiliating concessions. The Balkans, once envisioned as a weak point for the Central Powers, now become their staging ground, a region dominated by Bulgarian arms and German advisors. The Ottomans, though still fragile, reap unexpected benefit. The absence of overwhelming Entente power spares them immediate dismemberment. British advances slow without American money and supplies. Campaigns in Mesopotamia, Palestine, and Arabia drag on. Victories are fewer, costs heavier. Ottoman garrisons cling to positions they would have lost in our world. Constantinople, though weak, still stands defiant beneath its crescent banners. Across the Atlantic, Wilson makes one final attempt at mediation, proposing his points of peace, but the offer is brushed aside. Berlin has little reason to accept a moral lecture from a neutral power when its armies stand within striking distance of Paris. To the German leadership, America looks like a nation too timid to fight, yet eager to speak. And so Wilson's vision dissolves into irrelevance. By late 1918, the Entente faces an unbearable truth. They cannot win without America, and America will not come. Their soldiers exhausted, their treasuries empty, their alliances shattered. They confront the possibility of total defeat. Britain fears losing its fleet. France fears losing its republic. Both governments haunted by revolution from within, just as their enemies press from without. Negotiations begin not in Versailles, but under the shadow of German guns. The Central Powers dictate terms. Lorraine secured, Belgium reduced to a puppet, Serbia partitioned, Romania humiliated, Greece under monarchy, Italy stripped of gains, colonies redistributed across Africa in favor of Berlin, Vienna, and Sofia. The Entente leaders forced to accept what they once swore they never would. The treaty that emerges in this world is harsh, yet not identical to the Versailles of our history. Here it is Britain and France humiliated, their prestige destroyed, their colonial empires shaken. Germany claims vast concessions, yet struggles with the cost of occupation. Austria-Hungary preserved a little longer by German support. Bulgaria elevated into a regional power. The Ottomans, though still fragile, surviving, but weakened, still clinging to their old lands. For ordinary people across Europe, the peace brings no relief. The war has drained treasuries, killed millions, ruined harvests, and shattered societies. In France, anger erupts at leaders accused of betraying the nation. Protests swell, some demand socialism, others monarchy. The republic itself totters. Italy erupts in strikes and clashes between rival movements. Britain, shaken by hunger and debt, faces unrest in Ireland, India, and the streets of London itself. Germany, though victorious, is far from secure. Its people have endured hunger and blockade. Its workers resent the endless sacrifices. Soldiers returning from the front bring with them bitterness and radicalism. Berlin may claim victory, but the seeds of unrest lie deep. Austria-Hungary, though momentarily spared, still fractures within as nationalities demand independence. The empire a brittle shell propped up only by German bayonets. The world that emerges from this alternate treaty is unstable, dangerous, filled with resentments and unfinished struggles. It is a Europe where victors are exhausted, losers are humiliated, and none are truly secure. Where revolutions whisper in every alley, where empires cling to life by force of arms, and where the absence of America has not prevented catastrophe, but only reshaped its direction. This is not peace, it is merely a pause, a breathing space before the next storm.
The guns fall silent, but the silence is uneasy. It is not the silence of peace, but of exhaustion. Europe lies broken. The Central Powers victorious, yet hollow. The Entente defeated, yet defiant in spirit. The war has ended without America, and the consequences ripple outward like shockwaves across the world. In France, the defeat is unbearable. Since the Revolution, the French have replaced their governments after every lost war, and this time is no different. Protests erupt. Soldiers returning home refuse to salute the Republic. Strikes sweep the cities. Factions clash in the streets. Monarchists, socialists, radicals, each convinced that only they can save France. The humiliation of German occupation in border regions fuels resentment, and the promise of revenge simmers like fire under ashes. Italy, too, trembles, torn between Catholic conservatism and socialist uprisings, the government weak, the people angry. Some call for peace, others for revolution. The streets of Milan and Turin ring with chants. The fragile state threatens to collapse into civil war. The very nation that once dreamed of uniting its people now faces the possibility of tearing itself apart. France, though spared invasion, finds its empire shaken. Debt overwhelms its treasury. Hunger gnaws at its people. Ireland erupts again. India grows restless. Colonies question why they sacrificed for a war that brought nothing but ruin. London clings to its fleet as a symbol of strength, but inside the island, discontent grows louder each month. Britain, once the proud anchor of global order, now limps forward, a giant, wounded and unsure. The Central Powers revel in triumph, but their victory is poisoned. Germany, exhausted by years of blockade, struggles to feed its population. Workers protest. Soldiers march home with bitterness, their banners proclaiming survival, but their voices filled with anger against elites who promised glory and delivered famine. The Kaiser sits upon a throne less secure than ever. Austria-Hungary, propped up by German steel, totters on the edge of fragmentation. Poles, Czechs, South Slavs, Hungarians, each demanding freedom from the empire's suffocating grasp. Bulgaria briefly enjoys the fruits of war, enlarged by new territories, crowned as a regional power, yet surrounded by enemies resentful of its gains. Its people proud, but wary, knowing that revenge may come from any direction. The Ottomans, though spared collapse, still rot from within. Ethnic unrest, nationalist uprisings, corruption and poverty spread through Anatolia and the Arab provinces. The empire lives, but barely. And then to the east, Russia, a land already torn apart. The Bolsheviks, weakened by concessions at Brest-Litovsk, still seize power. Lenin and his comrades struggled to consolidate authority. Their revolution scarred by territorial loss, but their ideology burning brighter for it. The dream of world revolution persists, and Germany, now burdened with new borders, faces a restless Soviet shadow across the east, a shadow that grows darker with every year. Beyond Europe, the effects are no less profound. In Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, the colonial subjects watch the war of empires and see weakness. Britain and France, once untouchable, now look mortal. Revolts stir, movements awaken, the seeds of decolonization planted decades early. In this altered world, America, meanwhile, remains apart, untouched by the slaughter, its industries thriving, its farms feeding the world, its banks rich from European debt. Yet its refusal to intervene leaves it morally diminished in the eyes of some, while to others it stands as proof that isolation works, that the new world need not bleed for the old. But isolation has its cost. Without America shaping the peace, there is no stabilizing force. The treaty, forged in Berlin, serves only to deepen resentments. Germany, victorious but unstable. France, humiliated but unbroken. Britain, weakened but unwilling to surrender global influence. Austria-Hungary, stumbling toward dissolution. Russia, in flames. The Ottomans, barely breathing. The Balkans, a cauldron of rivalry. It is a map drawn not with compromise, but with spite. A map that cannot last. The next decades in this world will not be calm. Revolutions, civil wars, economic collapses, uprisings across empires, socialist movements clashing with monarchist restorations, fascist voices rising in Italy, radical ideologies spreading through Germany, France, and beyond. The absence of America did not prevent turmoil. It only ensured that when the war ended, the chaos was greater, the bitterness deeper, the instability more profound. So what if America never joined the First World War? The answer is not a peaceful Europe, spared from slaughter, but a continent more fractured, more unstable, more desperate. The United States saved lives at home, but abandoned a world to collapse. The war ended not with justice or order, but with exhaustion and resentment. And in that vacuum, darker storms gather. History reminds us that no one truly wins such wars. Some only lose harder than others. And when the balance of power is written not by compromise, but by survival, the seeds of future disaster are sown deeper than ever. This is the world without America in the Great War, a world where victory tastes like ashes and peace is only the prelude to greater chaos.